Darwin. Also tonight, Christmas plans thrown into doubt as Sydney's coronavirus cluster grows rapidly. A boost to the budget bottom line. The economy forecast to grow this financial year despite the pandemic.
Bulletin! A dream start for Stark in Australia!
And 2 early wickets help Australia to a strong start in the first test. Good evening, Eleni Roussos with ABC News. A Northern Territory police officer due to stand trial for the shooting death of 19-year-old Kumanjai Walker will have his case heard in the top end. Today, a Supreme Court judge ruled the 5-week trial for Constable Zachary Rolfe will be moved from Alice Springs to Darwin.
It was a quick hearing after hours of legal argument last week. In less than 5 minutes, Acting Justice Dean Mildren handed down his decision that the trial of NT police officer Constable Zachary Rolfe would be moved from Alice Springs to Darwin. The NT police officer was committed to stand trial at the Supreme Court in Alice Springs, but last week the court heard an application from Constable Rolfe's defence counsel that the trial should be moved from Alice Springs to Darwin, 1,500 kilometres from Yuendumu, where Walker died and where many of his family still lives. The judge urged the Crown to consider allowing witnesses from the Yuendumu community to give their testimony either here at the Alice Springs Supreme Court or at the Yuendumu police station. And he said that despite the move, members of the public would be able to watch the trial's proceedings via video link here in Alice Springs.
It's great that the community has access to hear and be part of what's happening, regardless of location.
Specific arguments for and against the application have been suppressed from publication. But Acting Justice Mildren has allowed the media to report that the application was based on the level of pretrial publicity and comments on social media as having the potential to risk the fair trial of the accused. A week of pretrial hearings has been set down for the 19th of July next year in a closed court. The trial will begin on the 26th of July and is expected to last 4 weeks. Samantha Johnshire, ABC News, Alice Springs.
A 31-year-old man has pleaded guilty in the Supreme Court in Darwin over the death of an 8-year-old boy near Katherine. Bretson Payne died in June after falling from a caravan which was being towed by Jonathan David Igskew along Edith Farms Road.
Yeah, we just miss him and we would like him to come home, but obviously he's not coming home until, we all pass away, and that's not going to be for a long time.
Bretson's family will return to court on Monday for Igskew's sentencing. The COVID cluster on Sydney's northern beaches has jumped to 17. Frantic contact tracing is underway to try to contain the outbreak. WA and Queensland have begun to introduce some travel restrictions, with fears the holiday plans of thousands of people could be ruined.
A week before Christmas, many would have been expecting to queue at the shops. Not for a COVID test, but as the number of confirmed cases climbs, the line for a swab swells.
Not good. Not good for Christmas. Very surprised it's happened in Avalon, actually.
Among the new infections are a worker at a retirement village in her 50s, her partner, and a musician in his 60s.
Interestingly, the band is called Nothing Too Serious, so certainly from our point of view, I wouldn't say it's exactly how we feel.
It is serious, considering the band's schedule. They played at the Avalon RSL last Friday, the Penrith RSL on Sunday, and the Kirribilli Club a day later. Anyone who was there at the same time should be swabbed.
These people who have come forward as heroes to put themselves there and to be tested, and now they're doing what they need to do.
That could include spending Christmas in self-isolation for some. Everyone at the Avalon RSL at any time last Friday has been ordered to isolate for 2 weeks, even if they test negative. That's because 3 of the cases were there that day.
But they're not the source of the infection. We need to find the source of the infection. That's why the genome sequencing is going to be so critical.
The festive plans of people in some aged care homes could also be in doubt.
We're recommending no visitors until we identify the source of the infection and feel more confident that we have it under control.
New South Wales is the gold standard, so I don't spend too much time worrying about New South Wales.
The other states do. Queensland says it'll only shut its border if the situation in Sydney worsens.
The action that we take will be based on what intelligence we can get.
The West is also waiting for health advice.
If we need to, we'll put up a hard border with New South Wales. I realise that would be very upsetting for many people.
Passengers arriving in Perth late today have been told they'll have to quarantine.
Unfortunately, while your aircraft has been in the air, there's been some changes to our legislation here in WA in relation to quarantining. Okay, but the good news is, and I'll get straight to that, it's not 14 days. Okay.
Not the Christmas surprise travellers are counting on. Rani Hayman, ABC News, Sydney.
The first repatriation flight from Paris has touched down in Darwin this morning. The Qantas plane with 146 people on board, including 3 infants, landed at Darwin's RAAF base. They've been taken to the Howard Springs quarantine facility. It comes as a further 2 people test positive to coronavirus at Howard Springs. The 2-year-old boy and 16-year-old girl arrived on a flight from Chennai on Tuesday. Since repatriation flights began, around 1,800 people have arrived in Darwin, with 35 of them testing positive to COVID-19. The next repatriation flight will come from London and is due to arrive on the 30th of December. Australia's economy is rebounding from the COVID crisis more quickly than expected, with new figures today confirming 90,000 jobs were created in the last month alone. Treasury is now forecasting the economy will grow this financial year, not shrink, as predicted in October's budget. Political editor Andrew Probyn explains.
The Australian economy is rebounding strongly.
One of the blackest years in generations, now slightly less red. This year's deficit, forecast in the October budget to be a giant $214 billion, now expected to come in under $200 billion. While the economy's now expected to grow this financial year rather than shrink as predicted just 10 weeks ago.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but there is still a very long way to go.
The improvement down to soaring iron ore prices caused by China's steel-hungry stimulus spending and fewer people being dependent on the JobKeeper wage subsidy. 90,000 jobs were created in November, the majority full-time. 74,000 new jobs in Victoria, which came out of long lockdown. The unemployment rate falling to 6.8%.
It's not about just numbers on the page, it's about millions of Australians who can't get ahead.
Perth man Steve Carter was part of the November jobs boom after being made redundant in July.
It makes you feel pretty horrible, particularly when I live alone, so I went from one income to no income for the household.
He applied for 70 jobs before landing permanent work.
It was awesome.
The Treasurer says it'll be another 4 years before unemployment reaches pre-COVID levels. With a decision on a permanent increase to JobSeeker, the unemployment benefit still to come.
There is 1.5 million Australians relying on that payment, and this government is happy to kick the can down the road.
Australia's Island Advantage was used in what's been a successful but massively expensive health and economic response. New South Wales' Ruby Princess embarrassment and Victoria's second wave disaster help states and territories get their contact tracing up to speed. And though there'll be bumps ahead, there are reasons to be optimistic about the new year. A vaccine rollout in early 2021 would cement the economic recovery. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
The Council of Social Services is calling on the government to axe its tax cuts. It says Australia can't afford them while maintaining financial support for those struggling during the pandemic. ACOS says the tax cuts will lead to more inequality.
Cliff Fraser used to be a long-haul truck driver until injury and illness ended his career.
Overnight, I literally went from $120,000 a year to, I think, about $16,000 or something.
In the years since, he's had to sell his house and other assets to stay afloat, picking up part-time work and making wooden items to sell at markets. He managed to keep his car, but he couldn't afford to keep it regularly registered until JobSeeker.
It meant that I was able to get a part-time job. I wouldn't like people calling me a dole bludger.
When New Start was reborn as JobSeeker, it was still $282.20 a week. But on top was the coronavirus supplement of $275 a week. In September, that supplement dropped to $125, and in January it will drop again to just $75 a week.
That's going to put a lot of people in a very, very bad place.
Nuha Ayed juggles studying to be an interpreter with being a single mum. She says Australia is the lucky country, but she is worried about making ends meet after January.
Please don't stop the payment or do something for us, or at least reduce the price from the supermarket or from the bills.
The last thing we should be doing is cutting the incomes of people who have the least.
Especially, says ACOS, when stage 3 tax cuts for high-income earners are still locked in for 2024.
The government has delivered eye-watering levels of tax cuts. Those income tax cuts, once all stages are delivered, will be costing the budget over $30 billion per annum.
On the question of tax cuts versus welfare cuts, the Treasurer's office didn't directly answer, but they did issue a statement saying the government will continue to provide support for those who need it. Cliff Fraser does have a view.
It's going to fatten somebody's offshore account, not trickle down to the poor people.
Some of whom have paid a lot of tax themselves. Ben Knight, ABC News.
Aboriginal landowners from the Gulf of Carpentaria say they're suing the Northern Territory government for compensation over the impacts of a controversial mining project. The native title holders from 3 claim groups are alleging the government acted against their interests in approving developments at the MacArthur River mine site.
A zinc mine sharing the land with an ancient culture. Since its approval by the NT government in the early 1990s, the MacArthur River mine has had a fractious relationship with the Gulf region's native title holders. That's now come to a head, with landowners suing the NT government over decades of development at the site, which they allege was approved against their interests. The Northern Land Council has lodged a claim for compensation with the federal court on the traditional owners' behalf, claiming damages to their land and culture. In an NLC statement, one of the claimants, Gudunji man Casey Davey, said sacred and significant sites had been damaged by the mine's operations. Our totem is right there where they dug up the dirt for the river diversion and the open cut. We need to be paid back for that and for the damage to our sacred trees. It's sad for us what happened at the mine, especially what happened to our sites. The compensation bid comes just 1 month after the NT government approved a major expansion at the MacArthur River mine, against the wishes of traditional owners and against the advice of its own Sacred Sites Authority. The Northern Land Council did not put anybody forward to speak about the claim today, and the NT government and mining firm Glencore declined to comment, citing the pending court case. Matt Garrick, ABC News.
The Northern Territory's emergency services are gearing up for a potentially dangerous cyclone season, with the first monsoon trough of the season developing off the Arnhem coast. Today, they've opened a brand new emergency response centre in Darwin, which will be ready to respond to everything from cyclones to bushfires.
When an emergency like a cyclone hits the Northern Territory, a huge response team springs into action. And from today, that response will be coordinated from a new state-of-the-art emergency operations centre in Darwin.
To move into a facility like this, which is very much up there with the rest of the country, is probably somewhat overdue, but we're very, very pleased with the outcome.
The $2 million centre brings together agencies including police, fire, the Defence Force and the government to coordinate the response to any emergency facing the Territory. And with an intense wet season forecast, authorities say they were racing to replace the outdated former centre.
We know coming into a La Nina event that the likelihood of a cyclone before Christmas, there was a likelihood of that, so we had to move swiftly to ensure that we had an appropriate facility. And as I say, within 5 weeks, this place has come up out of the ground.
This space doubles the size of the old Emergency Operations Centre, with room for up to 70 staff at any one time. Authorities say there's potential to respond to up to 3 emergencies at once, but the Commissioner says he hopes it never comes to that.
It's an insurance policy, there's no doubt about that. We would much prefer that life bumbles along beautifully in the Northern Territory and everybody gets to enjoy all that we have to offer. Unfortunately, the harsh reality is the Northern Territory is subject to a myriad of emergency situations.
Fingers are crossed this new centre isn't put to the test too soon. Nicholas Hines, ABC News.
Coronavirus cases in Japan are soaring, forcing the government to suspend a domestic travel campaign aimed at stimulating the economy. Tokyo has recorded its worst day of new infections, with more than 800 cases. That's at the end of a 3-week period dubbed critical to contain the spread. North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer reports from Tokyo.
Holidays are a time to travel, see the family and wish for good luck at Shinto shrines, which are busily preparing for an influx of visitors. But this year, it'll be a little different. Many Japanese are heeding health warnings coming early to beat the crowds and COVID. A stark contrast to the 2 million people who usually visit this shrine in the first few days of each year.
Healthcare services will be strained if the infection spreads because of socializing during New Year's. People should spend their holidays quietly.
With an eye on the economy, the government persisted with a scheme to boost the domestic travel industry despite mounting health warnings. But cases are spiking as winter sets in and people head indoors. In one hospital where 197 staff and patients tested positive, it's even had to deploy military nurses. And it's now suspended the travel subsidy scheme.
Travel should not necessarily be blamed for a surge in new cases, but we will focus on measures to curb the spread during the holiday period.
Suspending go-to travel was the right decision. However, this will only prevent the virus spreading in regional areas, so we need to reduce big gatherings in cities like Tokyo and Osaka.
Restaurants are still doing all they can to encourage customers to keep coming in as safely as possible. Some are delivering food by robots. Other venues are going much more low-tech. This shop serves its food and drinks with disposable face shields so customers can continue eating and drinking uninterrupted. It's a pandemic-prompted touch that seems sure to stick around. Jake Sturmer, ABC News, Tokyo.
Fiji has declared a state of natural disaster as a Category 5 cyclone bears down on the country. The storm is bringing gale-force winds, heavy rain and flash flooding. Evacuation centres have been set up across the island group and people in low-lying areas have been warned to move to high ground. A nighttime curfew has also been announced.
The impact forecast for this latest superstorm is more or less the entire country. Over 850,000 Fijians are in the direct path of the cyclone.
There are warnings Cyclone Yasa has the potential to be one of the most destructive in living memory. A shortage of workers during the Northern Territory's mango harvest has given Darwin-based refugees their first job in Australia. They're part of a new program trying to get refugees working on farms instead of seasonal workers and backpackers.
Buchange Faraha fled to Australia from civil unrest in the Democratic Republic of Congo 5 years ago, but she has struggled to find work.
Many people ask for me, show me your certificate and how experienced you are, everything, but I didn't have any experience.
This year she got her first job packing mangoes in Katherine.
I did a job. I'm very, very happy and I'm grateful.
She's part of a new program set up this year by recruitment agency The Job Shop, the Darwin-based Maluka Refugee Centre and NT Farmers Association.
Part of our campaign was to get Australians into work this season because of the lack of backpackers and the lack of seasonal workers that were in the country. So we really pushed everything to get some of our new Australians, we call them, into the farm work.
This year, the program employed 35 refugees for the harvest. It's not an easy job, and that's what makes these Congolese women proud.
Some friend maybe told us, no, you can't do it. Picking mango is a very hard job. Maybe men, they can do it. But the time we came here, we can do it. If men do it, also the women, we can do it.
The job shop says it will continue the partnership with the Maluka Refugee Centre next mango season. This has been a year of opportunity for these Congolese refugees.
I'm very strong. I'm strong, mummy.
John Daly, ABC News, Catherine.
To finance, and the share market jumped to a 10-month high, buoyed by strong employment data and the government's improving economic outlook. Here's Elise Morgan.
Plenty of good news today in the official jobs figures, aside from the fact that the jobless rate itself has come down to a better than expected 6.8%. Total employment is now just 1.1% lower compared to March. And if you take Victoria out, it's down just 0.4%. Total hours worked rose 2.5% in November, to be now just a smidge away from pre-COVID levels as well. Underemployment and underutilisation rates are coming right down, suggesting that workers are picking up more shifts and no longer being told to stay home. The data indicates workers and businesses are relying less and less on government supports like JobKeeper as consumer spending and general activity picks up. The federal budget update today shows the drop in JobKeeper demand as an $11 billion windfall. The budget update also confirms stimulus will continue to flow to some sectors, with another $250 million for the home builder program. As this chart shows, new home sales were already at a decade high, so good luck trying to get a tradie. The positive news today helped the share market rise a solid 1.2%, and the Aussie dollar also headed north, sitting just below 76 US cents now. The Aussie's also been helped by the Fed Reserve overnight, reiterating its plan to keep rates near zero and to continue to pump billions into the US economy. And that in turn has made Bitcoin even more attractive as somewhere to park money. Yet another record for the crypto overnight, surpassing 21,000 US dollars and rising. I guess that's finance.
India is battling hard on day one of the first test against Australia at the Adelaide Oval, with the final session under lights beginning a short while ago. Indian captain Virat Kohli has so far survived a searching examination from Australia's pace attack.
Australian Test cricket returned with a welcome to country. There were anthems and, best of all, after such a difficult year, the fans were out in force. India opted to bat first and was immediately on the back foot. With the pink ball in hand, Mitchell Starc looked menacing, but couldn't quite create another breakthrough.
Cries of catch it.
It took until the 10th over for the first boundary of the innings, as the Indians dropped anchor to wait out the Australian assault. Alas for India, Australia's third-choice paceman sailed on in. The dismissal brought Virat Kohli to the crease, with his fans immediately on their feet, as the skipper was tested by some short stuff. India went to the break at 2 for 41, with the refreshed Australians resuming their plan for the Indian master batsman on resumption.
Kohli's heart would have been in his mouth for a moment.
The introduction of spin allowed the batsman a few more scoring options. Kohli happy to take it on.
An authoritative stroke from Kohli.
But there was also the odd false shot as the battle continued. At the other end, the patient and considered Cheteshwar Pujara finally broke his boundary duck after 148 deliveries.
Oh, it's got there.
He lasted just another 12 balls before Nathan Lyon claimed his scalp. India 3 for 100. Neil Cross, ABC Sport, Adelaide.
The ATP says the Australian Open will begin on the 8th of February, but qualifying will be held in Qatar. It could mean a long round trip for Australian players at home who need to qualify for the tournament. The ATP schedule also includes 3 tournaments in Melbourne the week before the Open.
After weeks of uncertainty about the Australian Open, it appears the dates are in.
Well, cancer or whatever
The Victorian government is yet to tick off on it, but the ATP says the Melbourne Park Slam will run from February 8. The ATP schedule has tournaments in the USA and Turkey in early January, while Australian Open qualifying in Qatar will run from the 10th to the 13th. Players will then all fly to Melbourne to quarantine for 2 weeks. Once that's completed, there'll be 3 tournaments in Melbourne, including the Adelaide International and a 12-team ATP Cup, as warm-ups for the major. The WTA is yet to release its schedule, but is expected to have 2 lead-up events in Melbourne. For Australian players at home, a trip to Qatar looms as a tough prospect in order to qualify for their home slam.
Crikey.
Attention will now turn to which players will come to Melbourne.
I love you, Roger!
Roger Federer was hoping for a later starting date to help recover from his knee injury, but Rafael Nadal has confirmed he's in. Peter Lusted, ABC News, Melbourne.
Women have been competing in the Sydney to Hobart for 75 years, but are still heavily outnumbered in what's seen as a man's world. In this year's fleet, female sailors are making waves, featuring Olympians, round-the-world sailors and young racing champions.
Yeah, Sisters Claire and Juliet Costanzo have been competitive about their love of sailing since they were 8 years old. That sibling rivalry is being taken to a new level, facing off in their first Sydney to Hobart.
So you're out there in the open ocean, anything can happen.
Exactly. I'll be right on her tail the whole time.
Yeah, I don't know about that one.
The 21 and 24-year-old are already sailing champions.
So we've done a couple of international match racing regattas, some world championships, but I think nothing compares to the Hobart when you don't know what to expect.
They've had to put in the hard yards to prove themselves against the men.
Most weekends, you know, we're either doing boat work or on the water, weekday trainings, early morning starts. Yeah, it's a lot of time and effort, but it's all worthwhile in the end.
Their idol, Stacey Jackson, is now helping them learn the ropes. Competing in her 14th Blue Water Classic, Jackson's pleased women now have better opportunities in the male-dominated sport.
And that just gives that support that I certainly didn't have when I was a teenager dreaming of sailing around the world.
Olympic silver medalist Nina Curtis hopes one day soon there will be just as many women competing as men.
The boys kind of learn that there's no difference between you and them, and it just gets easier and easier. The more integration we have, the better.
In 1946, Jane Tate was the first woman to finish the Sydney to Hobart. This year, more than 160 female sailors are competing in the Great Race. Chloe Hart, ABC News, Sydney.
Time for the weather now, and tonight's viewer pick was sent in by Francine Chin. Scattered showers and thunderstorms about the Top End and Carpentaria district today, mostly hot and sunny in the south. A top of 31 degrees in Darwin today, 32 in Bachelor. It got to 33 in Katherine, 34 in Wadeye and Borroloola, 28, 41 in Alice Springs and Rabbit Flat. Tennant Creek hit 38. Owen Pelly topped the Territory's rainfall in the 24 hours to 9 a.m. 78 millimetres fell at Croker Island and just over 40 at Jabiru. Earlier today, Bullman and Millingimby got 30 millimetres of rain. 16 fell at Groote Eylandt Airport. Across Australia today, 30 degrees in Canberra and Perth, 28 the top for Brisbane, 16 in Hobart. On the satellite, thunderstorms continue across the Top End, while an inland trough is causing isolated storms over the centre. A monsoon trough lies across the Top End, bringing westerlies through the Arafura Sea and Gulf of Carpentaria. Interstate tomorrow, wet for much of the east coast, 30 the top for Brisbane, 19 in Melbourne, Adelaide 23. To our north, cloudy in Dili, thunderstorms for Singapore and Port Moresby, 31 degrees in Jakarta. Around the Territory tomorrow, sunny and 38 degrees in Alice Springs, storms for Papunya and Yuendumu. Further north, wet across the Top End, 30 in Katherine and Borroloola, a top of 31 in Nhulunbuy. And in the west, rain across the board, 31 in Bachelor and a top of 32 in Darwin tomorrow. A severe weather warning for heavy rain, winds and high tides has been issued for people in parts of the Arnhem and Carpentaria districts. High tide tomorrow will be just after 7:30 of 6.5 metres. The sun will rise tomorrow around 6:15, sunset just after 7 p.m. And looking ahead for Darwin, storms continuing throughout the week, temperatures above 30 degrees in Alice Springs, partly cloudy over the weekend, rain early next week. And that's ABC News for this Thursday night. Up next, 7:30 looks back on the year that changed us.